Stephen Pemberton is a researcher affiliated with CWI Amsterdam, the Dutch National Research Center for Mathematics and Informatics. His research is an interaction and how the underlying software architecture can support users. He co-designed the ABC programming language that formed the basis for Python. Involved with the web from the beginning, he organized 2 workshops at the first web conference in 1994. For the best part of a decade, he chaired the W3C HTML working group and has co-authored many web standards, including HTML, XHTML, CSS, XForms, and RDFA. He now chairs the XForms group at W3C. Stephen, here you go.
Good morning. From Amsterdam Science Park, actually the birthplace of the internet in the open internet in Europe. 32 years ago, just about, the very first European open internet connection started in this building that we're in now at the mind-bending speed of 64 kilobits per second, connecting the whole of Europe to the whole of North America. Luckily, the whole of Europe at that time was me and a couple of other people in this building. But since then, the internet here has doubled in speed more or less every year, so that it's now running at 8.5 terabits per second from a building just next to here. It moved into this huge windowless building. Tomorrow I'll show you a picture of it. Windowless because there are no people in it, there are only computers, all these people who want to be as close as possible to the lovely internet bits. The joke around here is that the Amsterdam Science Park is so well connected that you can reach 80% of Europe in only 50 milliseconds. Anyway, good morning. Welcome to the XForms hands-on tutorial. I've given tutorials in the past before. I have never given an online tutorial, and I've certainly never given an online hands-on tutorial. So it's going to be a challenge for us all. When I submitted to the conference originally, I submitted a non-hands-on tutorial, and the responses I got was, it must be hands-on. So this is a completely new tutorial, completely rewritten. So I've never given it live to anyone before. What I will be doing is each page of the more or less each page, I will introduce a new topic, and then you'll have 5 minutes to edit a file yourself, so you don't have to start right from scratch. I've sort of given you a basis, and you make a change to it. I thought that with the small amount of time that we've got available to us, just over 2 hours, that it would be easier for everybody just to change an existing file rather than have to rewrite a file from scratch. So I will be available for questions in each 5 minutes. There is somebody watching the question channel, which is the chat in Zoom. So if you have questions, put them into the chat in Zoom. The person who's monitoring the Zoom chat will then let me know that there are questions so that I can then go and have a look. Was there anything else I wanted to say? Oh yeah, so we've got, I think, 2.5 hours allocated. So after about an hour and a quarter, I'll stop for a short break for us all. But anyway, no questions yet. I will start. So I'm talking about XForms. XForms is a declarative language for applications on the web and elsewhere. It's been around for quite a time. In fact, last November, we celebrated the 10th anniversary of the formal release of the W3C specification for XForms 1.1. So it's been around for a long time, which means that there's been a chance for a lot of people to use it. It's in worldwide use, and I've given here a list. I'm assuming that you've all installed the tutorial as per the instructions. So you're looking at what you should also have on your own machine in order to be able to edit files shortly. So it's used worldwide, and for instance, the BBC, and this is what I mean by on the web and elsewhere, the BBC, for instance, have written their sports app in XForms, so you can see an image of it there. But there are a large number of companies that have also used it. Now, I have to tell you that none of these companies don't approach me and say, "Hey, we've used XForms." I usually hear it from either somebody who's installed it for the company and then tells me what they're using it for, or that somebody's just happened to see that they've been using it. So this list is just things that I've heard almost entirely via from people that they've seen it being used. So the U.S. Department of Motor Vehicles uses it. EMC, a large data company, an international. Many government websites use it, and the thing is, you often can't see by looking at the website that they've used XForms, but these I happen to know in the Netherlands, Onderwijs en Kadaster use it, and in the UK, legislation.gov.uk use it. The British insurance industry, well, you can read all those names. But anyway, lots of people have used it. And the nice thing is that some of these are very large projects. And what we've seen is that companies have been able to compare it with their existing ways of using it. And I'm not going to give you these stories, but what I can tell you is that it's often reduced the time necessary to produce an application to a tenth of the time and resources needed. And there's even one very large case which reduced it 100-fold. There are a number of implementations available. All my examples today use XSLT forms, and I see Alain Couture, who produced XSLT forms, is online. So thank you, Alain, for that. But there are many available from around the world. Also, a subset of XForms is actually part of OpenOffice and LibreOffice as well. So what you will learn. So you can look at this list yourself. Actually, I produced this tutorial by first listing the things that I wanted to teach and then going through it one by one and ticking them off, as it were. But you'll be taught about the structure of an XForm, about data and how you represent data, about the controls for controlling data, and then types, expressions, and events, actions, and submitting data. There are several other learning resources. If you click on those links, you will get to them. And there's also a quick reference, which I use myself actually all the time, just to remind myself what was the name of that attribute or something like that. So there are other resources available to you. Okay, so the structure of an XForm. So basically, an XForm is an XHTML document, that is an HTML document, but then represented in XML, with one extra element in the head, which is called model. And in the model, you put your data in instances and some other stuff involved with the data. And then in the body, you have a group of controls that binds to the data model and allow you to control the data. Because it's an XML file, it has to be served up as an XML type. The easiest way to do that is to use the file extension .xhtml so that it gets treated properly. Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks and look at some real XForm stuff. So within the model element in the head, you have one or more XML instances of data. Normally that's not visible, but I've made it visible on this page. And I should say that this whole tutorial is an XForm. It's one big XForm, and each separate page is a smaller XForm. So you're actually seeing XForms in action all the time. Whenever I do something on the page and it changes, that's because of XForms. But anyway, I've made that instance of data visible here. So you can see it's got 4 sub-elements, a product, an amount, a due date, and whether it's been delivered or not. And I can bind types, or you can bind types to data by using a bind element underneath the instance where you refer to the element you're talking about. So for instance, amount, and you can give it a type. If you don't give something a type, then the default is string. Now, in the body of the XForms, you have those controls, as I said, and those controls bind to elements and or to nodes in the instance. So for instance, I can say input ref equals product. I can give it a label, and that becomes then an input for that thing. So you can try them out on your own machine. If I type something in here, for instance, bread, then you'll see that up here, that has turned up in the instance. So how many do I want? I want 10 loaves, and again up here, the amount, the number has appeared, and if I click on the due date, my machine is running very slowly under the. Okay, then I can say add a due date, and what you see is that the controls adapt according to the type of the elements that they're attached to, and automatically they also they know about their types, so that if I type an invalid value in, then I get a warning. My machine is running very slowly. Okay, I get a warning that the value is not valid. You can also put this attribute incremental is true on an input, in fact on any control. And what happens then, but now you can't see it because it's gone off the screen, but the instance gets updated instantly. As I type, the instance gets updated. If you don't have incremental is true on it, then the instance only gets updated when you hit return or when you tab out of the field. Okay, so we've already come to the moment where you get to do your first exercise. There'll be 5 minutes. Yes.
There are some questions in the chat.
Okay.
There's also a question that's already answered in the chat, but there are still some open questions.
Do you want to read it to me?
The first question was from Eduard Drent. He asked, so no HTML5, and Adam Retter answered it. Maybe he wants to answer it for all of us.
So it's not about HTML5 or HTML4, it's just HTML. So as long as it's served up as an XML version of it, it works equally well.
Yeah, that's, I think, the same answer that Adam Retter gave. Next question is from Thorsten Rohn. Why integer instead of XS integer?
Oh, because XForms has a bunch of its own types, but you can do XS integer if you want as well. But there are a number of types built into XForms that aren't necessarily in XS, and they're all in the XForms namespace, so you can just type them without a.
Peter Lamers had an answer also. You want to say that, Peter, or not? Yes. Is Sid Bauman, is the value of bind / attribute ref and input attribute ref just an element name or an XPath?
It's an XPath, but we come to that shortly.
Okay.
But yes, so since people here will know what XPath is, the reference there is an XPath expression, and so you can reference anything in the instance that you can address with an XPath expression.
Okay, last question is from Eduard Drent. Can you define your own types?
Yes, you can, and I won't be covering that today. Good. So your first exercise is to take the form that you get by clicking on the button there in this form, and giving a type to the delivered element, and attaching an input control for it. So the type should be Boolean, and add an input control for it. You can use any editor you like. Okay, 5 minutes should be enough. So I'm going to move on. I should also say that that we have 2.5 hours for this this session. There's far more material, I believe, than will fit in 2 hours, but that doesn't matter. I've written the tutorial so that you can work on it yourself, so that we'll just get through as much as possible we can today, and then the rest you can do in your spare time. And I'm available for questions if you stumble across problems. Okay, so the next page is about output. So along with the input control, there's also an output, and there are two kinds of them. One that uses just ref, and that just accesses an element or a node in an instance, just like input does. So in this case, you output the reference of the price, or output the price slash amount. And so for people who don't know XPath, that's how you get to an attribute on an element within an instance. But there's also a more general expression using value, which allows you to have a full XPath expression for calculating something. So for instance, amount times price. In both cases, the label is optional, so you can either just output the value, or you can output the value with a label. And you can use CSS for styling how your labels are output. So if you change the values below and you watch what you'll see is the values changing on the whole page, because as I said, this whole page is an XForm. So if I change that to a 3, everything on the page, the total price changes as well. And if I change the price to 19, you see everything else change. And if I add a due date, or if I say it's delivered, you'll see up above the instance values changing. So you won't need it in this exercise, but one of the functions that you can use is count, which counts the number of matching nodes. So for instance, if I said count due, there's only one due element, and so the output will be 1. But if I say count star, then it tells me that there are 4 elements in the instance. So anyway, the next exercise is a little bit longer. What you've got to do is move the delivered element in the form that you click there, so that it's an attribute of the due element. You have to change 4 places. You have to change the instance, the bind, the input, and the output. And you can use how the amount is represented. You can use that as a model for what you've got to do. Any questions, Bieke?
Yes, there are.
Yeah, okay.
Well, first is more a remark than a question. Hans-Jürgen Renau says, great to know that we can ask Stephen when problems arise while going through his full tutorial in the days to come.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then a question from John Lumley. Does output attribute ref support full XPath? And if so, why both attribute ref and attribute value?
And the answer is no, and that's why ref appears on all controls, and has to reference an instance node. But value can be any general expression, and that appears on lots of different controls as well, but not every control. So, for instance, not on input, only on output. But value can be a general expression, and ref has to be an instance node. Okay, so see if 5 minutes is going to be enough. Joel, what kind of hiccups, if any, are there in using XForms in different browsers? Well, I have to say, well, so this is something I haven't said about implementations, and I wasn't planning to either, but there are different types of implementations. Some are server-side and some are client-side. We're using a client-side implementation now. The server-side ones typically do browser sniffing and work out what to send you. But I have to say that I haven't had any problems with XSLT forms working in different browsers, and I use it on a lot, including some quite old ones as well. So I haven't had any problems based on browser. Edward. So XForms is officially, the official version of XForms works with XPath 1, and I only use XPath 1 features today. The new version of XForms uses XPath 2, but there's nothing actually to stop you from using other versions of XPath. It's not dependent on the version of XPath that you use, so it's not restricted to any particular version, let me put it like that. John Lumley, I noticed that the delivered property can be in one of 3 states, true, false, or undefined. Can you set a default in the instance? Yes, you can. It's true. Undefined is if there's absolutely no value in it at all. But once you set it, it goes to either true or false. So you can set it to a default by just putting true or false in the instance value when you start up, as it were. I mean, you just put it in the instance. So yes, the answer is yes, you can set it to a default. There are two possibilities for this. You can either always assume it's going to be in the 3 states. That is to say that it's either going to be empty or true or false, and then only test for one of those, for instance, true. Or you can initialize it to a value like false, so that you know that it's always in one of those 2 states. So in the examples, the 2 examples you've seen up to date, the instance contained its values inline, but it's possible to obtain values from files or from over the internet. So for instance, you could say instance resource equals currencies.xml, and that gets it out of the file in the current directory from where you've got the form. Or you can go right over the internet and say, for instance, instance resource equals, and then some HTTP something. So that floatrates.com, that's a website that actually produces its data using an XML file. If you click on take a look, you will see what looks like a regular web page, but if you do a show source on it, you'll see that it's actually just an XML file underneath it. So do it if you, well, there's no point. So originally when I wrote this, I thought there might actually still be people in the room who might not have had an internet connection. But of course, you've all got an internet connection, so I don't have to tell you that there's also a file in the tutorial that's a capture of the data. But what you'll see is if you say, take a look, and then control view source. What you'll see is that it's one big XML file with some introductory stuff at the beginning, followed by a whole bunch of item elements containing details about one particular currency And actually, this is the currency rates against the euro last night at midnight. Did it see my close window?
There is one new question.
Yes.
There's an error in my XForm. Where can I see the error message? It was shown.
So that's a hard question to answer because it depends what the error is. Right at the end of the tutorial, there's an entry called troubleshooting that tells you how to find out how to locate errors. It's likely to be an XML error or a closing quote or stuff like that. So unfortunately, if you're not in the room, it's hard for me to see. Maybe in a break, I can have a look at your screen to see what the form looks like. Anyway, carrying on. That was about external instances. Let me also say something about displaying values. Outputs directly after each other will abut. So if A is 3 and B is 4, which in this form they are, and you output them together, then you'll get 3 and 4. So it looks like 34. You can always add characters between them. For instance, here's adding a comment, or you could define a CSS rule that, for instance, makes something with that class a line by itself. And so if I add class equals line to those two elements, then they come on separate lines using display block. Anyway, our next exercise is to use that form, which loads the external instance from that currency site. And output what the publication date is. So you're going to have to look at the XML and see what the name of the element was for the publication date, and then output how many element items there are. In other words, how many currencies it actually has. And if you don't remember how to do that, I did tell you in a couple of slides earlier that the function for that is count. So output the publication date and the number of item elements. Okay.
Even there's also a post on Slack from Joel Aldesmaki about the place to find the XForms functions.
The list of them, you can find them right at the beginning of the tutorial. I have a link to the quick reference, and there it's got the list of all the what you will learn. The XForms quick reference has a list of everything, and if you click on XForms functions and XPath functions, you get a list of the functions that are available by default. At least you can. There are more available than that, but those are the ones that are available by default. Okay. So the repeat control. So consider this instance here where I've got a bunch of countries and each country element has a name element and a capital element. If you've got a repeated element in an instance like this, what you can use is the repeat command to treat each one in turn. Control. I keep saying command, it's control. So for instance, repeat ref equals country. So that takes each country in turn and does whatever's in between. So for instance, output the name, a colon, and output the capital. So then you get the output as shown here below. And as I say, this is a real XForms. So this is really output from a repeat like that. So this was a question that was asked earlier. So that within the repeat there, you note that you can say that you say output ref equals name, and that's because, sorry, my machine is, yeah, okay, because of Zoom, and my machine's running very slowly and so reacting very slowly. So when I try to go up, yeah, so within the repeat, you use the context of the containing expression. So it's because we've said repeat ref equals country, then you say output ref equals name and not output ref equals country name, because the context gets set to the country name. And this is generally true throughout XForms. If you've got a containing element, then with a ref on it, then the context is set to that element. So for instance, there's a group element which doesn't do anything except group a number of commands, controls. And so if you said group ref equals country one, which is the first element in the list of countries, it's the numbering is from 1, then again you say output ref equals name, and that's the child element of the first country element. There's another way of setting the context. You need it much less often. I very seldom use it, but I'll mention it anyway, is to have on any control, you actually literally set the context, and you say context equals country 1, for instance. I should also mention that a repeat works on any list of nodes. And so if you only were interested in the capitals, then you could say repeat ref equals country / capital. That gives you then the list, a list of nodes that are only the capital elements, and then you output ref equals dot, and dot always references the current element, and so that will just, as you can see below it, list the output the capitals. Repeat works on any list of nodes, so you can even say repeat ref equals star /star. That will give you every element then in that instance. There's a nice function called local name, which will tell you the name of the context element. So here you can say you can see I'm outputting the local name of the element followed by its value. That dot there is just the value of the element. And so you can see here, I'm getting the name of the element and its content. So we get name capital for all the country elements. Okay, so we're going to go back to the currencies XForm that you were already working on last exercise, and where you just output the number of item elements. Now what I want you to do is do a repeat for each item element and output the value of the title element of that. So repeat over it and output the title element. Multiple instances. So you could have more than one instance. Up to now, we've only had a single instance. But to identify which is which, then you give them an ID attribute. So for instance, in this case, up here, you've got ID as currencies, and then the resource is currencies XML, and here ID is search, and then that's an inline instance. To identify which instance you're referring to at any time, in a ref, you can say instance and then the ID to identify that instance. Oh, use the mouse, I'm sorry. Use the mouse, Stephen, so that it doesn't make clicking noises. So you can identify it using the instance function. You don't have to do it for the textually first instance. That's always the default instance. So if you don't use the instance function on a reference, then it assumes you're talking about the first one. So this is a bit of XPath. If you have a node set, you can select a subset of them by filtering, by putting in square brackets a condition after the node set. So for instance, the function contains AB says whether A, whatever that is, contains the thing B. So if you've got that function, then you can take the item, you can do a repeat over the items, those that contain something. So it contains dot, so whether that particular item contains the contents of the element instance search / q. So that would be the way of having of being able to search for a particular item or items by having a search string and then using contains to just select those items that match it. So your next exercise is to take the form that you've just created where you've repeated over all the items, and then rather than repeating over them all, repeating over a subset. You want to create a search instance and a search input, and then select the items that match that input. So hints, almost everything you need, you can copy and paste from this page. And another hint, it works much more impressively if you use incremental equals true on the input control for the search. Let's carry on. We've got about an hour to go. Oh, in fact, we've got exactly an hour to go. Yes. Okay, perfect. All right. So the next section is on selection controls. So sometimes you, for instance, in that search, sometimes you want to offer the choice of the values to input rather than having to type them in. And there are two controls that support this in XForms. One is called select, which allows you to select a set of values. That's much later in the tutorial. And select one, which allows you to select a single value. And that's what we're going to talk about now. So here's an example. Select one is going to produce a result. That's some instance value. It can have a label itself, in this case, currency. And then it has a number of items, and each item has a label and a value. So this in the way that XForms works, this specifies a control, but doesn't necessarily say anything about how it should be displayed. And in fact, it has three appearances by default, although you can use CSS to change those defaults. But the three are appearance equals full, which is that version on the left-hand side down here. Appearance is compact, which is this version here. And appearance is minimal, which is a drop-down list. What you'll notice now is that these controls are all connected to the same result instance, so that it doesn't matter which of these three controls I change, the others will change to match because they're all connected to the same result. What you see here down here is an output of the result value, so JPY in this case, which is this value up in the item here. Use the mouse. So if I select euro, I get the result EUR. Okay, so your next exercise is to go back to the currencies form, the one that you just added a search field to, and if you want, replace or replace the search field or add to it by adding a select one, like the one above here. So you can just copy and paste it, except you're going to have to change the ref field of the select one. And that should be the element you used for the search field in your previous example. So you can leave the search field there, it doesn't matter, but you should add a select one that allows you to select just four of the currencies, these four listed here. Yes, at the end of the tutorial, the very last page gives you answers to all the exercises. So the answer is yes. And there's just, in fact, there's a folder of answers, but that last page just links to them all. I should just mention in passing that what you're looking at here in the tutorial, that thing at the top saying which section you're looking at, that is just a select one, actually, which selects which chapter you want to go to. And in fact, if you go to the title right at the top here and you click on that, then what will flop down is also a select one, but then with appearance equals full, so that you can see all the chapters and where we currently are in the list of chapters. Use the mouse, Stephen. All right, on to the next chapter. Okay, so a select one like that has got its values and its labels built into the select one, but of course it's far more interesting and useful if you can get those values from data, and you can. So for instance, if I've got this instance here, which I've called currencies, which contains a list of valutas with a name attribute and then a value for the code, then I can create a select one that gets its data from that instance. So there I've got a select one ref equals result. And then instead of a list of items, I have a thing called item set. The item set grabs those valuta elements, as it were, and then sets the label to the name attribute of each of those and the value to the content of that element. So again, we get exactly the same looking select down here. It works exactly the same. It's just got its labels and its values from the data. The one thing that to watch out for here is that because select one has got a ref, that sets the context for the whole of the content of the element. And so the ref of the item set you have to be very careful about, and you have to specifically say where you want to get the data from. In this case, I've said from the instance currencies. So it's easy to make that mistake when you're not yet experienced with context switching. That you have to be very careful with item set about where the ref comes from. Okay, so you're going back to that currencies form now, where we added a select one, and this time instead of getting the values literally in the select one, you're going to get them from that currencies document that you've got from somewhere over the internet. The labels come from the items, from each item element, and they should. So that's going to be your ref on your item set, and the labels should come from the target name element, and the values from the target currency element. The ref for the select one should still be the same reference as in the previous select one. So, of course, I said that this thing at the top is a select one for selecting which chapter you want to look at, and of course that's actually a dynamic select one. It's driven from a description of the tutorial that says what chapters there are, actually what exercises there are, what answers there are for each chapter. So I'm just using that to drive the whole tutorial, which was great for me, because if I decided, oh well, actually I'd like that chapter to be somewhere else, then I could just move it in the descriptive XML document, and then the whole tutorial changed automatically to match. All right, going on, and now we start getting to some quite exciting stuff. So what you will have noticed is that most of what happens in XForms happens automatically. You change a value here, it changes everywhere that it's related to. But sometimes you want to get into that you want it to do something else, or you want to do something additional to what it does automatically. And for that, there are events that get dispatched that you can listen to if you want, and react to. So one of the most useful is XForms ready, which is the event that gets sent when the form gets started up and when it's ready to go. You can listen to that so that you can, for instance, initialize variables appropriately for this run. To listen for an event, you use an action element. You should know that later I'll say other ways of doing it, but the basic way is to use an action element with an EV:event attribute on it that says which event you're listening for. So we're listening for XForms ready in this example here. You have to put the action within the element that the event is dispatched to. Now, in the case of XForms ready, that's the model element in the head. So within the model element, along with your instances and your binds, you can put action elements listening for various events. In this case, we're listening to XForms ready. And within the body of the action, you can have a number of things which are also called actions as a generic name. And a very useful one is set value, which, as the name suggests, it sets a value in an instance. So for instance, if we had an instance that contains just a single element time, on initialization at ready, we can set value ref equals time to the value of the local date time. So in other words, we're setting up the form so that the value time has the current date and time. And this page is, of course, an XForm, which you can see is 1220. Sorry, yes, I just moved to this page. So when I moved to this page, it set the date and time to 1220, which I've output below down here. Oh, sorry, yeah, I've got triggers. All right. So another useful event is when a user clicks on something, and a trigger is a control whose default appearance is as a button. And whenever the user clicks on it or activates it in whatever manner, you can tab to it and press space, for instance. A DOM activate event is dispatched to that trigger. So for instance, here we've got a trigger whose label is click me. And within its body, I've got an action that just sets the value of count to the value of itself plus 1. So it just increments the value of count. So you'll see here, if I click on this button, it was actually already, it was just blank. But each time I click on this button, it increments the value. At the bottom of each of these pages, I've got triggers that load the exercises, and they all look like this. So for instance, can I get them both? Yeah. So there you've got to trigger this form. You can also see something else, a hint. If I hover over it, up pops the hint. Every control that has a that has a label, I'm sorry, can also have a hint on it, so that if you hover over it, it gives you some information, whatever you put in the hint. But in case of this trigger here at the bottom, I've got an action that loads a resource called events exercise.xhtml, and show equals new means, and put it in a new window or tab. So in other words, it works a bit like an A element in HTML. A trigger also has an appearance attribute. So for instance, appearance equals minimal. Here's an example of that here. You can still click on it. It just doesn't look like a button anymore. Okay, so we're not doing, the next exercise is a fairly simple one. We're not doing currencies in the next one. You've got to take that form, change it. So at the moment it changes the date and time. Sorry, displays the date and time. You've got to change it so it only displays the time. And also I'd like you to add a trigger that updates the time whenever you click on it. So you're going to need the function substring, which takes the string, which is the date and time, and start and length. So those characters out of it that you want. So that's the output you're going to do with the value. And clicking on the trigger will reset the time each time. So submission. So when you have something like instance getting its resource from over the internet, what happens is that XForms goes out, gets that resource, parses the XML, and puts the result into the instance. Now, this is just a tiny bit of what we call submission. It's just a simple version of submission. Submission in general allows you to send data from an instance out to a server somewhere, collect the result that comes back from the server, and put it somewhere. And there are several different places you can put it. So you use a submission element for defining what you want to happen, but it only actually does it when you tell it to. So it's a declarative definition of what you want from that submission, and then at a given point you tell it to actually do the submission. Now, there are actually, of all the elements in XForms, this one has the most, because there are an enormous number of things that you want to be able to control. I'm only going to handle a few of them, and the most interesting ones here. So you say which data you want to send with ref equals. That's obvious. And normally you want to send a whole instance, but you can send a part of an instance if you want. If you don't want to send any data at all, but you just want to go and get the data from somewhere else, then you say serialization equals none. You say what you want to do with the incoming data with replace equals. And if you don't care about the data, any data returned, you use replace equals none. So here is an example submission that describes the same as that instance at the top of the page. We say submission resource equals, so that's where we're going out over the internet. That's the URL that we want to get. Serialization equals none. That means we're not sending any data out with the request for that resource. Method is get. That's the HTTP method we want to use to get that data. We're going to replace an instance, and the instance that we want to replace is the one called currencies. As another example, the equivalent of the load action that I showed you on the previous section for going out and getting, for instance, an XHTML page and replacing everything with it. Submission resource equals, and then the thing that we want to get. Method is get again. Serialization is none. We're sending no data. And replace equals all replaces the whole form, in other words. If you have several submissions, which is quite possible, you can give them a name with an ID attribute, just in the same way as with instances. Now, how do you submit? How do you do a submission? Well, the easiest way is to create a button. So submission equals, and then the name of the submission. If there's only one, then that's the default, and a label, just as you've already seen in many cases. This example will submit a submission called get EUR. In fact, it's just a shorthand for a trigger with a label, again, of submit, and an action that if it gets activated, it sends, that's the action, sends a submission called get EUR. So both of those are entirely equivalent. So what you're now going to do is go back to your currencies form, and now that form currently only gets the EUR, the euro values. And so what you're going to do is create two submissions, one to get EUR and the other to get USD, and two submit controls, one that will initiate the EUR one and one that will initiate the USD one. So it will replace the currencies instance with the contents of that URL. Okay, two submission elements, two submit elements, go. So after a submission is completed, and as you saw, that all happens automatically, an event is sent to the submission element to announce that. So you can listen to, so that you know when a submission is completed. And in fact, the XForm continues to work even if the submission is not complete. I mean, while it's working, you can still carry on doing stuff in the XForm. But after the submission is completed, it does send an event, and it can be one of two events, one telling you that the submission was successful, and the other telling you that the submission was unsuccessful. So they're called XForms submit done or XForms submit error. Now, in general, you can ignore XForms submit done, except there is an example later on where you can use it to put it to good use. But it's probably always a good idea to listen for XForms submit error and announce it in some way, or at least let the user know that something has gone wrong. So what you do is in the body of the submission, you put an action element and you listen for XForms submit error. Now, some events, amongst them the submission responses, have extra information available, which you can access with a function called event. So for instance, XForms submit error returns a number of things, including error type, which says the type of the error message, which is more details, response status code from the server, for instance, 404 for a file not found, response reason phrase, again from the server, such as file not found, and resource URI, which is the URI that was used for the submission, so you can see what did I do something wrong. You can do how you use this information is up to you, but there are a number of possibilities. For instance, you could set you could store those values in an instance by saying set value ref equals instance errors / type. And a value of the event error type. Or you could just display a message. So there's an action called message, and you can just put some text in that message. And so here, submission error, error type, and then I've got the value of the error type, and so on all the way down. So what I want you to do is take the exercise that you've just done, which has now got 2 submits, and add actions to both the submission elements to catch submit error. So the simple case is you could just cut and paste this this message version, for instance, and then try it out by changing one of the submissions so that something is wrong, that there's no resource instance attribute, or you change the URL to something else, a non-XML, or just try it and see what happens, see what different errors you can manage to get. Any new questions? Is there an event for when a submission is invoked, or can I add a trigger to submit element? No, well, normally, you know when you're invoking a submission because you're clicking on something. But there are events that get sent, and I would say check the spec or check in the quick reference. You can probably check to see which ones get sent to the submission to say it started. In general, you don't need to know it, but if you really do need to know it, then there's a way of catching an event for that. All right, so it's possible. This is probably going to be, this is going to be our last page, but it's a nice one. It's possible to specify that a value in an instance depends on other values, and that whenever, it's just like a spreadsheet really, that whenever one of those values changes that it depends on, the dependent value gets updated. For example, this instance here contains a product, a price, a tax rate, a shipping rate, the number that wants to be ordered, and so on. What we do is we calculate a subtotal, which is the number of them times the price. We calculate the tax, which is the subtotal times the tax rate divided by 100, because the tax rate is 15%, of course, 10%. We calculate the shipping, and there I've got a conditional. If the subtotal is greater than 0 and less than the top shipping rate, then we charge the shipping rate, and otherwise we charge 0. And finally, the total, we add up the subtotal, the tax, and the shipping. And I do a calculation there because I do a round of that. So I multiply by 100 and divide by 100 and then round it so that, sorry, I multiply by 100, round it and divide by 100 so that it always looks, you always get you don't get an odd number of digits after the full stop. So if you try this out, you can change 2 and change it up to 5, and then if it goes above 5, I think then the shipping goes down to 0. So you can see everything being updated, just like a spreadsheet, really. Here's where I explain context again. So that when you've got a ref like this, up here, ref equals total, for instance, that sets the context for the bind. And so if I'd said if I've got an instance like this, and if I said bind ref equals order, then if I said calculate price times amount, that would be this price and this amount. And if I wanted to get to this price up here, then I'd have to say ... price. And so that's why all these calculations up here have got lots of dots in them, is because the context is set to a particular element. And in those cases, I always mean the element at the same level, which is ... So it's something you have to watch out for. It's something very easy to get wrong. But if a calculation is not working, then it's often a case like that. I should say all those examples were arithmetic calculations, but there are string functions as well, like concat ABC that concatenate strings, and substring, which you've already seen. So you can do any sort of calculation at all. So what we're going to go back to now, and this is the last exercise of this tutorial, is you're going to go back to your currencies XForm, and you're going to actually calculate the URL that you want to use to download the right currency. So you're going to add 2 new elements to the search instance, one called code and one called URL. Duplicate the select one and point the ref to the new code element, and bind a calculate to the URL element that calculates the URL based on that code element. So that the URL, EUR part. We're not going to go and load it yet. In a future example, it does, but you just output the URL that you calculate and put it under the new select one. So you're going to be needing concat to concatenate some strings and the value that comes out of the select one. The currency code is in capitals, but the URL is in lowercase. So use the lowercase function to return the lowercase version of the currency code. And don't forget to use instant search in the bind element. And maybe I should also have warned that the calculations are in an attribute, and so I've got double quotes around them. So any strings within your concatenate are going to have to use single quotes so that there's no confusion between the double quotes of the attribute and the strings within the calculate. So our time is up for today. As you can see from the screen, we got through about half of the tutorial. So now I know how long I need to give the whole tutorial in the future. I hope it's been useful. I would happily have any comments from anybody by email or whatever about things that were hard to understand or things that took too long or whatever. Any comments you have, I'd be happy to hear. Of course, you can now carry on with the rest of the the rest of the tutorial by yourself. If you need any help, don't hesitate to contact me. I will now hand you back to the chair for today. Were there any other questions before I?
Compliments for you.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you all. This has been a very interesting experience for me to give this live without very much feedback from the people around me. I will now hand the floor back to our chair for the session.
Thank you. So, thank you so much, Stephen. I would like to ask everybody to unmute and shout or knock on the table or applaud for Stephen Pemberton's
Here, here.